Hi everybody. This will be the third week of December. I hope you're all ready for Christmas. I've done my shopping, thank goodness, so that's all fine. So today we're going to do a Curlew in watercolour. But this was a question I was asked by one of my students, my members, asking how you paint water with a sort of glint on it. And I just happen to have this Curlew here. And as you can see, the water's it's very shallow to begin with, but the sun must be setting and the light is just catching on this water surface, causing reflection of the sun, but also it looks like the water is shiny. So they said, how do you do that? So I thought, right, okay, this is the perfect picture, especially if you like birds. I love birds. I love waders. We've got lots of them here in Wales. There's such magical time of evening when the sun is going down and you can hear them singing or making noises or whatever you call it, out there on the marshy regions of the outskirts of Wales along the coastal path. It's really beautiful. So yeah, let's have a go at this. Now, if you're not very good at drawing birds, understandably, you may not be. I look for shapes. So I look for, like, there's a circle on the head, there's an oval on the neck, and then there's a larger oval on the body. I see forms in shape form. If you can't do that and you really don't want to be bothered to draw it, then just trace it. Print out a black and white copy on your printer and use tracing paper. Use trace down, which is what we use for watercolour, or you can just sort of put some pencil on the back and trace through as you used to do at school. All right, so first of all, you trace it through. Well, I've got this piece of watercolour paper and I've put a border around the outside, and what I've done is I've traced the bird through. There's a little bit of a shadow being cast here by my phone, which I'm filming from above. It's late evening here, so the light isn't great, so I'm only going to show you this bit. So what I've done is I've drawn the bird on, and then what I've done is I've taken some masking fluid. Just one sec, I'll just get it because I'll put it away. You can buy masking fluid online. You can buy it from any art shop, including the Range and places like that. This one I've got is Terry Harrison masking fluid, the blue stuff. And the reason why I use this is because it's blue and you can see it. A lot of masking fluid is a sort of creamy colour or white, and it's quite difficult to pick out on a white surface. So if you find that difficult like I do, then get yourself some tinted masking fluid. Okay, this is good. Now, I've had loads of questions about water, but also about masking fluid. It is and causes people enormous trouble. The best thing to do is to put it on using a masking fluid brush. This is a special brush where the hairs have been treated so that the masking fluid doesn't stick to them. Masking fluid almost is like a gum base. And if you use it on your brushes will die on you. So don't use it on your brushes. Like I said, you can buy these masking fluid brushes. They are well capable of taking the masking fluid, and then you just let them dry and it just peels off. Otherwise, use a feather tip or a cotton bud tip, or people use the nail pens that you use for decorating nails. They've got metal ends and you can do dots on nails with them. They're really good as well. So there's lots of options. You just need to find one that doesn't muck up the hairs on your brushes. Okay, paint the masking fluid on. Don't shake your masking fluid, just rotate it if it hasn't been used for a while. Okay, just turn it upside down. It needs to be mixed. It does separate. You can see where it's separated before here. All right, so but if you shake it, you get air bubbles in it, and that doesn't help. So just rotate it slowly until it's well mixed. Take the lid off, put the masking fluid on, put the lid straight back on because it will go off in the pot. Okay, don't let it dry out or be open to the air for any amount of time, because it's glue based, gum based should I say. It does dry in the air. Okay, with this, once it's on, use a fine brush for details. Do not use a great big thick chunky brush for legs and things like that because it will just look hideous. All right, either use a brush that you've got or even chop into a brush so that you can make the details really fine. You know, cut half the hairs off so you get a finer point or whatever you have to do, but do not use a big thick chunky ended brush on a beak or on a leg. All right, once it's on, it doesn't need to be mega thick, but it does need to cover the paper. Let it dry naturally if you can. Don't hair dry it because the gum is affected by heat and it will bond to your paper forever. It'll never come off. The other tip is don't leave it any more than a day on your work. I have left watercolour masking fluid on for a few days and it has come off, but I've also left it on for a few days and it hasn't, and what it does is it tears the paper. The idea is that this is now a surface, once this is dry, that you can work on really fluidly without having to paint round these little tiny bits. All right, that's the reason why we use masking fluid. And so when you peel it off, you rub it really gently. So once we've finished the water and the reflection, what we'll do is I'll let it completely dry and then rub it very gently with the finger. But like I said, it does cause issues and sometimes it tears your paper and there's nothing you can do about it then. You have to just treat it as a loss and throw it away. Start again and make sure that you follow the rules for masking fluid and you should be okay. It does vary between manufacturers. The more money you spend, you know, all that sort of thing. The best thing to do is to get a strip of paper, put a blob on at different times of the day for different amounts of time and see which ones tear your paper off, and then you know. It also depends on the quality of your paper as to how well it comes off. It is a minefield. However, in this instance, it's really useful. So if you can get used to your own masking fluid and know how it works, then it will be very useful to you. All right, so I'm going to let this dry off. I'm going to leave it on overnight because, like I said, it's too dark in here now to paint. I've got lots of shadows. You can see my hands and everything, can't you? But I just wanted to get this bit in and I'll finish it off tomorrow morning. So this masking fluid will have been on for about 24 hours or so. All right. So you'll be able to see how it behaves once it's been left on for a while. Okay. So here we are. It's the next day. I've left this to dry overnight. This is masking fluid, just to refresh you. Terry Harrison's masking fluid, the blue stuff. And I put it on with a masking fluid brush. But I also use these, which are nail art pens. Okay, and what they are, they're for putting nail varnish on with, or dots or decoration on nails, and they have little bubbles on the end. You see, but they come in different sizes. And I use these quite frequently to put masking fluid on as well, again because they're metal. If the masking fluid dries, you just peel it off, but they're really useful. Alright, they're called nail art pens. Okay, quick slurp of coffee. So the next stage is to undercoat this watery scene. So what we need to do is mix up the colour. The colour that's come out on my printer, because it really depends on how these images print on your printer, but this is quite purple. If you want it to just be blue, darker blue, or cerulean blue, or something like that, then choose a colour. You know, it doesn't have to be this purple. I think I'm lacking in a bit of yellow in my printer at the moment, so that's why it's gone a bit more purple than normal. But I actually quite like it, so I'm going to sort of stick with roughly with these colours. I'm going to mix up a large amount of this purple undercoat. Sorry, there's a jet going over. Here in Wales we get jets going over all the time. They practice up and down the valleys here. It's gone. Okay, so undercoat it, and we're just going to lift off these marks using a small brush. The marks for the bird, the reflection, you'll put on afterwards. They're darker than the undercoat, so you won't need to put those on. So literally what we're going to do is just cover the whole thing with this pale purple colour, and then we're going to try and lift off these marks here. Now there's various ways of doing it. Some people use razor blades, so what they would do is undercoat, let it dry, and then they scratch the very top surface off with a razor blade. That is quite good. It does work, but it tends to be, I might do a little bit down the foreground just to show you later on how that works if I remember. I haven't got anybody to remind me of things here, so quite often I say that I'm going to do something in these tutorials and then I forget halfway through. Anyway, okay, so for the moment I'm going to use some tissue, paper towel, whatever you want to use, and brushes, just to create this lovely shimmer that you've got on the surface of the water. If you lose it, or if you can't do it, you can always put it back on using some gouache, so don't worry. Okay, so you need a large brush. Now a wash brush, or I've got Chinese brushes here. I really like Chinese brushes. It's really works really well. Or you can use a large wash brush. It really depends on how big your work is. My work here is A4, so it's not huge. And we're going to mix up a purple. So my go-to colours for purple are ultramarine and alizarin crimson. So that's your dark red and your blue. In your sets you would always have an ultramarine and either a cerulean or a cobalt, and then it's a matter of you going out to buy other blues, and they tend to be sort of more inky blues like indigos and phthalo blues and things like that. So generally most watercolour sets will have these colours in. That's alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. Okay, now I was reading something the other day about using your brushes to mix paint with and a lot of people tend to use sort of old brushes or cheap brushes to mix paint with, and in acrylic painting and oil painting you use a palette knife, and the reason why you do that is so that you don't damage your brushes. So if you've got expensive brushes like sable brushes and things like that, then mix with cheaper brushes and then use your good brushes for laying down the paint. So that's the purple I've got, which is not far away from the colour that's there. So it's really up to your eye as to whether you put more blue in or more red. Okay, so I'm just going to add some more blue into the mix just to show you how that changes the colour. You can see that's quite significant. Sorry, I've got a frog. Okay, and then to add more red in will give you a richer purple. So that's really up to you. Okay, so always test your colours out either on the side of your work or on a scrap. I recommend that highly. It's not a good idea to make your mistakes on your finished piece. So right, next stage, once you've mixed up enough colour, and when I say enough colour I mean that much. Okay, you need quite a lot, it needs to be quite watery. we're going to put a layer of water down, and this is where the benefit of the masking fluid comes in. Now my brush is, I haven't washed it off completely, so it's got a slight tint of the purple. Here comes the jet again. It's coming back over. So a loose layer of water, and what we're going to do is we're going to try and this just gives you, this is wet in wet, right? So this just gives you a little bit of time to sort of play with your surface. If you didn't have it wet to begin with, then you would struggle to get all these marks lifted out and blah blah blah. Okay, you can lift marks out while when it's dry, but I like to do it when it's wet. So the foreground is darker than the distance. So I've got my design desk here at a slight angle this way, so that it should flow down a little bit, right? So I'm just going to mix that and keep it fairly pale at the top, and then as I come down I'm going to add more pigment, okay, so that it becomes darker as the water reaches the foreground. Okay, so you can see I've used almost all of that pigment that I mixed up. And there you can see there's a slight graduation of colour, but we've got a line here, so we need to mix that down. Go off the edge, over the edge, always like that, and you shouldn't have any problems. Now if you have pools of liquid building up on the edges, just take a paper towel and just soak them up. I'm going to put a little bit more pigment in the foreground here, just a touch more. And also, you know, make sure that it's dark enough, because the effect of the shimmer on the water will be stronger if you've got a darker tone. Okay, so make sure it's dark enough for you. I mean, again, you can experiment on scrap bits of paper to get this tonal range correct. Okay, that should sort of bleed into one another very nicely. You can see there's a little puddle at the bottom there. I'm not too bothered about puddles, but I know a lot of you are. So you literally just take up a piece of paper towel and just soak up a little bit of excess like that. Alright, you can see it's just collecting on this side of the masking tape. So again, just on the edge like that, just lay it flat like that, carefully. You don't want to go on to the work if you can. Okay, so now to the lifting part. So wash your brush off and lay it flat to dry. Always lay your brushes flat to dry if you can. So the next stage is to lift marks off, right? So I've got a clean damp brush here, and I'm going to take a piece of paper towel. I'm using an old one here because I don't need it to be absolutely clean, and we're just going to lift off some lines, right? So they are on a slight angle. Every time you make a mark, wash off in clean water and lift. Okay, clean water and lift. And we're imagining that that reflection is not there for the moment. Okay, so just keep going until you're happy. Now you could go in, you can see that the blue is coming through a bit more than the purple. Now the reason that is because the blue is a heavy stainer and the alizarin crimson is not as heavy a stainer as the blue, so you might need to work a bit harder to get the blue off than the mix in the purple, the red. All right, now you can see this is coming off, it's coming off nicely, but it's not mega strong. So just keep going. You just have to persevere with this method. It does get easier as it starts to dry off, but because we've got quite a lot to do, I recommend that you get on with it. Okay, and again, just keep an eye at the bottom, just for any pooling like this. Just carefully absorb that paint. Okay, like that. Don't get too much water on your brush. I just put a brush mark there that had water on it and it spread. Can you see? That's how it works. So just be careful that your brush is not too wet. And you want to start with the ones in the distance, right? So another option is to use a tissue, right? And if you just use the edge like this, just have an edge to the tissue, you can just literally go in and start to lift off marks like this, which is easier, but it's less easy to control because the tissue is quite thick. Okay, so you can see that the tissue is lifting off the pigment, but it's not as precise as using a brush, so just be aware of that. And also be aware of the fact that you have to change, because that's now absorbing the colour. So pinch the tissue like that, so you've got a nice edge, and then work into, and you can see that the marks that are in the distance are much more blurry than the ones in the foreground. So you can keep them blurry like they are now. Just keep working into it while it's wet. Okay. So this is the tissue method, which is quite good. But like I said, it's not as precise as the, you can see there's a bit of a pool there. I'm just going to get rid of that. The hair there, I wonder if that's causing the problem. Right, let's go and find a cleaner bit. Squeeze it so it's got an edge, and then work into your, don't forget to do under the bird. Keep pinching. Get a clean piece. Be careful with your mark making. Make sure it's horizontal. Make sure that you're not going out of the area where the marks are. So you can see I'm just doing some very light marks down the foreground. Be careful of the shape of your, see there's a bit of a curve on that one. I'm just going to try and get rid of that by putting another mark there. Just be careful with the shapes. This is again why using a brush is much more forgiving, because you can be a bit more precise. However, this is working quite nicely, so I'm just going to continue with my paper towel for the moment, like this. Right, I think I'll leave that with the paper towel because it's lightened it up enough, but you can see that the fact that my surface is quite pale and it dries paler, remember, that the lines don't stand out really strongly. So it's quite important that you do go back in and you lift some marks out with a brush. Okay, so clean, dry brush again, and just start to lift out those major marks that we need. Clean and dry all the time, particularly under the bird. That's where the strength. What's happened here is that the photographer of this picture has put the focus in the middle of his screen, which means all the detail is coming out on the bird and on the area of water that's around it. So that is why everything is in focus around the bird and not in the foreground. So it's like almost like a macro setting in the foreground. It tends to go a bit blurry. So the main work that you need to do is around this middle section here. Okay. So keep lifting. Again, this is down to how much patience you've got as to how much time you spend doing this. But it is worth it. You can do some little marks as well. Just make sure you clean your brush off each time, because it works more efficiently if you do that. Just some little marks. Vary your brush sizes so that you end up with a variety of marks under this bird. Okay, when you're happy you can stop. We will go in and we'll put some gouache on this, and we will also put some shadow work on. It looks quite pale at the moment, but that's because we've got nothing to back it up with. So you'll find that once you put on your reflection and your bird, you'll find that these will stand out a little bit better. So don't worry too much about the fact that they're very pale at the moment. Okay, I think that's slightly on. Yeah, that's okay. All right, so that's the lifting out stage. I'm going to leave that to dry off now. Okay, so it's now dry. I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to do the reflection of the bird, and we're also going to put some gouache on. So with the reflection of the bird, all you're looking for is a darker, more heavily pigmented, that means more paint in the mix of paint than what you put on the background. Okay. The theory with reflections is that you mix up the ultramarine and alizarin crimson, and then you're supposed to mix whatever colour the thing is. So if that bird was green, then you would put a touch of green into the mix. Okay, but the bird is sort of white and it's got a little touch of brown in it, so I'm just going to add a bit of burnt umber into the mix. So I've got ultramarine, alizarin crimson and burnt umber, and I've got a purple, but it's sitting on a brown. It's got a slight brown tint to it. Okay, so we're going to need a fairly thin brush for this, and something ideally that's got a fairly decent point on it. So you can see that this brush here is a detail brush, but it has got a rounded end, so that's not ideal. And then I've got this brush which has a nice point to it. So if I moisten it, you can see it comes to a point. Okay, so you're after that sort of brush really. This one is a cheap student range that I bought ages ago, and it's got slightly worn, it's got a curve on it now. If I was to dip that into boiling water, just the hair, then I could straighten that up again, but for now it'll do. So make sure that your paper is dry so that you can lean on it and keep your hand steady, and start with the mix. Again, you can test the mix out on a separate piece of paper before you start. And the other theory with reflection is that it's supposed to thin out as it goes away from the thing that's causing the reflection. So have your darker colour nearer to the bird and your lighter tones further away, and use a wavy line and have it broken up and wiggly. Really observe those marks that are being created by this bird. Don't just go in willy-nilly and put in marks. It's really important that you get them in the right place, and that, again, like I said, that they become lighter as they move away from the bird. So I'm just going to put in, so when we get to this point, we've got some more lines here, and then you start almost painting the bird itself, or the shape of the bird itself. So again, pay close attention to where those marks are. And then once we end up down here, we've got a long line there, and I'm running out of paint, and you can sort of see the head shape up here. This is what's causing the head shape. I'm just going to mix up a bit more of that colour. Remember, it was alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and a bit of brown. Okay, so there we go. I can use this bigger brush now because I've got a larger area to work with, and I noticed that it's a little bit more purple than brown, so I'm just going to mix in a little bit more red and a bit more blue, and also add a little bit more water to the mix. Okay, so it's thinner around this area here. Can you see that? It's just giving you that. If you mix up different tonal values of these colours, then you will get a much more interesting result. Okay, you can always put darker sections in if you need to. Just keep them fine, like that. Remember, it does dry lighter, so make sure that you get the depth of tone in there, and just make sure that you don't go out too far away from the subject. So there's some lines coming down here. That's a bit. I'm just going to mix up a little bit more blue and put some blue streaks in just around here. And the reason why I'm putting a little bit of colour in is because it's coming closer to you, or to the observer, and with that you get a little bit more detail. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm just going to extend that one a bit more actually, and extend this one right across there like that, because that's where the head is, and it seems to be, we've got this, so this is where the beak is coming down. Again, it's a bit paler than the rest of the, so I'm working in the shape of the beak like that. Okay, there we go. Now I'm just going to go back in and put some darker pigment just here, just because that's where the drag of the bird is in the water, and it's quite dark, so I want it to be dark enough. Okay, you can see that that is really helping. I've just dripped here. Okay, so that's your reflection done. The next stage, wash your brushes off really well, because we're going to use some gouache. Okay, and the reason why I'm using gouache, I just want to show you actually before I start using the gouache, is how to lift off marks while it's dry. So I've got a clean dry brush, clean semi-dry brush should I say, and you just go in, you just keep cleaning off your brush and lifting that pigment off. You can also, while it's dry, you wouldn't do this while this was wet, you would only do it while it's dry. So like I said, just put some water down, let it absorb, and it should start lifting little marks off. Okay, so if you wanted to do more of that, then go ahead. And the other option is what I said, which was to use a razor blade. Okay, so I don't know whether I've got a razor blade, let me just see. Yeah, I've got an old Stanley blade here. If I can get it off, I will try. Yep. So be careful, obviously, very sharp. An old razor blade will do. I'm just going to do it down here so that I don't. So all you do is you put the blade flat, and you see this. Let me just zoom in a bit. Slightly on an angle, but right, okay. So all you do is you put your razor blade flat and you just drag across the paper like this, you see, and the paper will come up. But this is a technique that needs a bit of practice. Can you see? And you certainly wouldn't do this unless your work was finished, you know. So drag, and all you're doing is you're lifting off the top layer of colour. You see, so that this is what creates the sort of glint on the water. So I'm not going to do this all the way up because I like the finish that I've got here already, but it is a technique that you can have a go at home, and like I said, just try it on a scrap piece of paper before you start. But you can see that that is quite effective. Ready? Yeah, so have a go and see if it's your sort of technique. All these lessons are really about finding the things that work for you. You know, you may really love one technique but not another, so practice, and practice on scrap paper so that you're not making huge mistakes on finished pieces. Okay, so back to the gouache. So I've got some gouache here on my palette, and this just dries out and then I keep reusing it. So you just need to re-wet it and it goes again, just like watercolour. Okay, this is water-based gouache. So again, if you put it on and it's not quite right, then you can lift it off again. Whereas if you use acrylic or something else, then you know, it's permanent. So just be aware of that. And also remember that this is quite strong. So, you know, just be careful with it. You can always tint it with something if you think it's a bit strong. Okay, but it is really useful. But like I said, please make sure that you use a fine brush with this. This does not work in big, chunky, rounded marks. Alright, and don't go overboard with it. It's much better if you can get some of your white marks off with lifting, and or scratching rather than just using gouache. Alright, especially if you're using watercolour, you're not really supposed to use gouache. If it was put into a competition, it would be marked down for using gouache, so just be aware of that. So you can see that this restores some of the sort of crisp, really crisp lines that we need in this picture. Okay, I'm just going to work into this, but I'm going to do it on time lapse. Okay, so we speed this up a bit. Okay, so that's the gouache more or less finished. I can always go back in and put some more on later. You can see that I've dried it off, and the gouache also dries lighter, so be aware that you might need to go back in. The other tip is to make sure that you graduate it as you go away, so less gouache as you go away from the bird, more gouache around the bird, and then less as you come forward again. I'm just about to remove the masking fluid. I've got normally leave it on. So I'm just going at it really careful. And there you are. Okay, try and make sure that it's all off. If you just feel with your finger, you'll be able to feel where it is. Okay, I'm hoping that that's going to be all right. Now I just need to go and charge my phone. It's running out of battery, so I will come back to you to finish the bird off in a little while. Okay, so I've recharged my phone and everything's dry, masking fluid removed. So the next stage is to paint the bird. So the bird is a curlew and it has a sort of variety of browns, creamy, sort of white, coloured feathers. So, and maybe some bits of black here and there. Use a bit of Payne's grey or something. I'm just going to put a pale brown. I've got my detail brush again, the one that's a little bit curvier than it should be. And I'm just going to put a little bit of, well, you can use raw sienna or burnt sienna. It's up to you really how red you want these legs. It's not red, it's a browny colour, but I just want to put an undercoat on here. I'm just going to drag a little bit of the colour down into the leg. Okay, and then after I'll put a little, actually no, I'll just put it on now. So a bit of burnt umber just to darken, oops, a little bit too much water in that mix there. A little bit of burnt umber just to darken the legs a little in places. You can even put a bit of purple on in there if you wanted. I'm going to put the same colour on the beak, nice and pale. You really need a detailed brush for this. Don't go in with anything bigger. And then I'm also going to put that colour under a lot of these. This body area, but I'm going to leave patches of white showing through, mainly because I want to have the white of the bird's feathers showing through. So just going quite loosely with this colour. Again, like I said, a bit of burnt umber, a bit of raw sienna, whatever you've got in your palette. He's got a white mark around his eye, so I want to leave some white around there. Loosely put some rough marks in, like that, mainly over the top section of the bird, like that. You want to leave most of that uncoated. And I'm going to use some of that purple that we've used in the water, just to give him, because it's probably sunset, and we've got reflections of the colours in the water on this bird, so it's a good idea to use the purple that we've used in the water on the bird as well. You've got to be careful with the detail where you put the purple. Just go slow and really observe the way those hairs are falling on this bird. We've got quite a lot of purple coming down under his chest, like this. Okay. And this is all you do really, you just build it up until you're happy using those colours. So you've got your purples, you've got your browns, and you've got, to finish off, some greys. So I would use a Payne's grey. If you lose your whites again, you can always go and put them back in with a bit of gouache, which we used on the water. But just go in gently and really describe these little flecks that you've got coming around on this bird's. It's even got some darker tone on the legs there, like that. From the image I can't really decipher which leg is in front of the other, so I'm just going to imagine that the back leg is the one that's towards the foreground. I don't know whether that's right, but so just these little marks, keep building, and if you need to use different sized brushes, do that. And you can see that the purple is drying quite lightly. We've got some thicker marks here for the tail feathers, so just press down with your brush a little bit harder, like that, so that there's more definition on those tail feathers. And then it goes into that sort of almost triangular shaped feather marking on the main section of the body, and then as it comes lower it breaks up a little. These details are really important when it comes to describing how the body is shaped. These little marks will help the eye understand what's going on in this, on this bird's feathers. So now I'm going to add a bit of Payne's grey into the mix, and I'm going to start to darken up areas where it's a lot darker, and even you might want to go in straight with some straight Payne's grey. This is for the definition on the head of the bird. You may want to do this in just do this, there we go, in lighter tones. It's up to you. There's a little bit of red on the beak. I'm just going to put a bit of red in. This is just a bit of red mixed with that Payne's grey colour all the way down to the tip. I'm just going to soften using a damp brush, soften that beak in to the background like that. Make sure it comes to a tip, to a point, sorry, rather than a tip. Needs to have a point at the end, be narrower here than it is here. Payne's grey again. If you want to take your time with this rather than rushing it like I'm doing, just do small bits of it and then let it dry, and you should be able to have more control over how the paint works with the mark making. Okay, so if you do a bit and then let it dry, and then do a bit more and then let it dry, you'll have more control. But it's very important that you have a fine brush to do all this work with. I'm just going to come, I'm not going to outline the bird. Please don't do that. It's really important that you have marks that are broken for this bird. If you outline something, it tends to look very sort of childlike, so just be careful with that. Again, go in and define some of these heavier marks with the Payne's grey. You can put a line in places, but you must sort of leave gaps where the line is broken. Okay, that will really help with stopping it looking like a child's drawing. Alright, so again, define some of these marks that you've made with the darker tones. You can see how that's building up really nicely now. And again, it really depends on how detailed you want to go, how much effort you want to put into this little bird. You know, if you like realistic drawing, then you know you might want to spend some extra time doing this in even more detail than I'm doing. But like I said, control it by letting bits dry off and coming back to them. Okay. I'm just going to put a little bit of more purple on these legs because they're a bit darker than I've done them. So especially on the sort of the joint area of the bird. And then around this area I'm just going to put in a little bit of shadow just on the underside of that area there, and then I'm just going to wipe most of the paint off my brush, and I'm just going to put in a slight suggestion of colour just in these areas around where the like that. Okay, so I think that is more or less done. Let me just get my gouache again. I've just been using my gouache to make some cards, so in between jobs. What did I do with my brush then? There we go. So like I said, if you've lost some of your whites, just take a little bit of gouache on your brush, and again, if it's too white then knock it back with a bit of colour. So like for example, round the eye you could put a dot of white, you could put flecks in around the hairs like this. You might not be able to see this on film, but if you were to look at this with your eye, the real thing, you would see that this is quite white. Again, in here, if you lose a little bit of white, just pop it back in again. And on these lovely feathers, they have a sort of very distinctive sort of swirled pattern where the feathers come down. So you can always put a few more of those in. Okay, so again, just build these up. You'll find that as things dry off, that things will get lighter, so always just let things dry and go back in with a mark. Okay, and again, over the top of, I realised that over the top of here there would be some marks as well, so you can put sort of a couple of finishing gouache marks in on top of the water, and again go back in, put more and more gouache down if you really feel it needs it. You know, you might find that some of the gouache that you put down earlier on is just not strong enough, so go back in and put some more strength in. You know, don't be frightened of adding more in, certainly around the bird, but obviously because you've taken your masking off, you have to be really careful around that bird. Okay, probably what I'll do just to finish is to darken up that back side of the bird. So I'm just going to use a bit of burnt umber and I'm going to put it into that Payne's grey and purple mix, and I'm just going to darken up just to give it an extra bit of drama, because it is sunset and the bird would be in quite a lot of shadow, so I'm just going to darken up patches of this. Again, just keep to that rhythm. Imagine that you're adding feathers onto this bird. Just going to make his head a bit darker down here. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it at that because I'm in danger of overworking it. Okay, so I'm just going to remove this. My hands are really cold today. I think I'm going to have to start wearing. I have got heating here in my studio, but it with the fact that I've got a tin roof, it doesn't really sort of stay in. Just going to take this off so you can see the final picture. Move my gouache out of the way. And my water. So this is a curlew. We have lots of them around the estuaries in Carmarthenshire. So if you feel like you need to, my paper just tore a little bit there, did you see? And there. If you feel like you need to go and see the real thing, then take some binoculars and go and have a look. They make a very distinctive sound and they're very interesting to watch. So get out over Christmas maybe and have a look at a real curlew. There's lots of other birds to be seen. I like to go down to Kidwelly Quay. That's a great spot, and also down to Larne, which is another great spot. Okay, so there we are. I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see the bird a little bit more closely. Okay, my feeling with this is to let it dry off completely overnight maybe, and then go back to it and just see if you need to darken things up. I have a feeling that it probably could do with a little bit more darkness around here, and maybe some more gouache as well, but I'm pleased with it. It's a nice little picture. Okay, have fun. There's a lot of learning in this, a lot of, you know, how to create, well, this is very shallow water, so there's a skill in painting that. And enjoy, stay safe everybody. I know we're coming up to Christmas, but people will watch this video at other times. So happy Christmas if we're coming up to Christmas, not happy Christmas or happy New Year if we're already into the new year. And I'll see you again. Okay, bye.